Have you ever felt like you've gone too far to ever be forgiven? That maybe you made one bad choice, or a string of them, that slammed the door shut on a second chance? If that sounds even a little bit like you or someone you love, then you're in the right place. Because today, we're diving into one of the most powerful, misunderstood, and deeply emotional stories Jesus ever told, the parable of the prodigal son. But this isn't just a story from the Bible you heard in Sunday school or brushed past during a sermon. No, what we're about to unpack is the real meaning, the hidden layers that most people miss entirely. And I promise you, what's tucked inside this parable has the power to change the way you see forgiveness, family, grace, and even God himself. But let me warn you, this isn't just about the lost son. There's a twist in this story, a message Jesus wrapped in a shocking ending most people completely overlook. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to discover something deeper than you've ever imagined. Now, I know your time is valuable, and if you clicked on this video, it's because you want answers. Maybe you're searching for peace. Maybe you're curious about why Jesus used this specific story to reveal something so profound. Or maybe you're just tired of surface-level religion and you want something real. Either way, you're about to get exactly what you came for. You're going to leave here knowing the true meaning behind this parable, not just the story of a rebellious son and a forgiving father, but something far more personal. And trust me, once you hear this, you won't be able to forget it. Let's be honest. Life doesn't always give us do-overs. People hold grudges. Families fall apart. Mistakes echo for years. And yet, this ancient parable has survived for centuries because it offers something most of us secretly crave, a way back home. But here's the twist. This isn't just a story of redemption. It's a reflection. It's a mirror. And depending on where you are in life, you might find yourself in the shoes of the rebellious younger son, or maybe the bitter older brother. Or, for some, you might relate more to the father, watching someone you love spiral while you wait, brokenhearted, hoping they'll come back. This story hits differently depending on where you are, and that's what makes it so timeless, so human, and so powerful. So, before we go any further, let's do something together. Close your eyes just for a second. Imagine someone you've hurt, or someone who's hurt you. Feel that emotion, that tension, that ache that's hard to describe but lives deep in your chest. That right there is where this story lives. Jesus wasn't just telling a cute story about a father and two sons. He was speaking directly into the emotional wounds of the human heart. And I want you to feel that as we move forward, because this isn't just theology, it's therapy. It's not just religion, it's restoration. We're going to walk through this parable not as passive listeners, but as real people with real baggage, real regrets, and real hopes. And by the end, you're going to see what Jesus really meant when he told this story. But here's what most people miss, and this is why you absolutely have to stay until the end. The real climax of this parable isn't when the father embraces the lost son. It's not even when the son comes to his senses in a distant land. The emotional heart of this story comes in the final act, one that churches rarely talk about. The final conversation, the bitter brother, the open-ended finish that leaves us all asking, who's really lost here? That's where Jesus drops the real message. And it's not what you think. That ending is a mirror, and if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the moment Jesus turns the spotlight from the prodigal to you. Right now, you're probably wondering, who exactly are these people in the story? What makes the younger son leave everything behind? Why is the older brother so angry, even when everything turns out okay? And what does the father really represent? We'll get to all of that and more. I'm going to break it all down for you, layer by layer, using simple, human-centered language, real-life analogies, and powerful insight into how Jesus used storytelling to do what no lecture ever could: transform hearts. You'll see how this ancient parable is still one of the most searchable and talked about teachings of Jesus on YouTube, TikTok, and social media in 2025, and you'll understand why it's trending again today, because our world is desperate for what this story offers: forgiveness, healing, restoration, and a way back when you feel like you've lost it all. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt like the black sheep in your family? Like no one understood you, or maybe even gave up on you. Or maybe you did everything right, followed the rules, stayed loyal, and still felt unseen, unappreciated, and angry on the inside? If that's you, then this story was written for you. And that's why we're not just going to skim the surface. We're going deep. Because the prodigal son is more than a parable. It's a picture of us all. We're going to walk through the cultural context of the story, the scandal of what the younger son really did, the radical response of the father, and the often ignored reaction of the older brother. I'll also show you why Jesus told this parable at that specific moment in the Gospel of Luke, who he was really talking to, and how the people listening would have gasped when they heard the ending. I'll bring you inside their world, first-century Palestine, a place where honor, shame, and family meant everything. And once you see the setting clearly, you'll realize this parable isn't just emotional, it's explosive. And you'll finally get why Jesus chose it to deliver one of his most unforgettable messages. There's a reason this story keeps popping up in Google searches and YouTube titles like Hidden Meaning of the Prodigal Son, Jesus' Most Powerful Parable Explained, or The Shocking Truth About Forgiveness. People everywhere are hungry for real answers, and this parable doesn't disappoint, if you understand what it's truly saying. That's what this video is for. And I'm not going to waste your time. I've spent hours breaking this down not just to inform you, but to transform the way you think, feel, and see yourself and others. This isn't just about gaining knowledge. It's about healing your heart. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why the father ran, something no dignified man in that culture would ever do. You'll understand why the son's speech was cut off halfway through, and why the older brother refused to join the celebration. And you'll hear Jesus' message not as a distant lesson, but as a personal invitation. A call to come home, to forgive, to be forgiven, and to stop living in shame, whether you're the one who left or the one who stayed and grew bitter. But before we get to that moment of truth, before we hear the words that could change everything, we have to start at the beginning. A younger son, restless and reckless, does the unthinkable. He asks his father for his share of the inheritance. Asterisk while the father is still alive star. It's a request so shocking, so shameful, it would have left the original listener stunned. Because in that moment, the son wasn't just asking for money. He was saying, asterisk, I wish you were dead. Asterisk, and what the father does next is even more shocking. But we'll get to that. Because what happens next? You won't believe it. The story begins not in the moment of rebellion, but in the slow, subtle drift of the heart. You see, the younger son didn't wake up one morning and suddenly decide to blow up his life. No, this kind of departure brews quietly over time. It starts with small seeds of restlessness, a hunger for something more, a whisper in the mind that says, there's got to be more than this. Maybe he started noticing how life on the farm always looked the same fields, same chores, same rules. He was the second son, after all. Not the heir. Not the one who got the first blessing. He likely spent most days in his older brother's shadow, following the routine with no real say, no real power, no real identity apart from the family name. Over time, that shadow started to feel heavier. And while his father was kind, generous, and deeply loving, sometimes love, especially the stable kind, can feel boring to a heart-chasing excitement. So the son began to imagine a different life. One with color, with adventure, with freedom. And as those thoughts grew louder, the distance between his heart and his home began to widen. Now, people in the village likely noticed. Maybe the way he looked out past the hills more often. Maybe the way he flinched when his brother spoke. Maybe the way his eyes lit up when travelers passed through town with tales of faraway cities and flashing coins. It wasn't just about money, it was about identity. He wanted to feel like he mattered, like he could make his own name. And then came the moment that shocked everyone. The ask. The inheritance. In Jewish culture, this wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a deeply offensive rejection of the father's role, the family's honor, and the traditions that had kept them rooted for generations. But still, the father divided his estate and handed over the share. No questions. No begging. Just heartbreak and open hands. It's a move that has baffled scholars and pastors alike, and yet it sets the tone for everything Jesus was trying to say. The father lets him go. As the son left, the village surely buzzed with judgment. Some probably scoffed, "He won't last a week." Others might have envied his courage. Maybe a few silently wished they could do the same. And here's where things get interesting. Because what the son steps into isn't just physical distance, it's an emotional unraveling. In this far country, with money in his pocket and no rules, he becomes someone else entirely. Or maybe he becomes who he always believed he really was. He surrounds himself with strangers, feeds off validation, spends money like it grows on trees. The parties get louder, the nights longer, the faces more shallow. He's trending in the wrong direction, but for a while, it feels like freedom. And just when it seems like he's finally become someone in the eyes of the world, everything crashes. The money dries up, the friends vanish, and a famine hits hard. Not just a hunger for food, but a hunger for meaning, for safety, for home. But let's take a step back. What really caused the fall? Was it the famine? The overspending? Or was it something deeper? An emptiness he carried into the city that no amount of partying could fill? That's the question Jesus wants us to wrestle with. Because the famine wasn't just in the land, it was inside the son. And now, broken and alone, he finds himself feeding pigs, an unthinkable job for a Jewish man, surrounded by unclean animals, starving and desperate, even wishing he could eat what they ate. That's how low he falls. But what's strange is how long it takes him to go back. Why doesn't he return immediately? Why does he hesitate? Could it be shame? Fear? Or maybe he's not sure if the door will still be open. And here's where the mystery deepens. As we follow the son's descent, questions begin to rise that Jesus doesn't answer outright, but wants us to ask. Why did the father give the money without a fight? Was it just love, or did he know something about his son's heart that others didn't? What about the older brother? Why is he never mentioned during this entire time? Did he try to stop his brother? Did he gloat when he left? Or was there a hidden jealousy brewing under the surface? And the biggest question of all, when the son does come home, why does the father react the way he does? What does that tell us about God? These aren't just details, they're breadcrumbs. Hints. Red herrings. See, it's easy to frame this parable as a clear-cut story of a bad son and a good father. But that's too neat. Too easy. Jesus didn't tell stories to entertain. He told them to provoke, to stir, to make you question your assumptions. So we have to look deeper. Was the younger son truly ready to change? Or was he just out of options? When he prepares a speech, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you," is it sincere? Or is he rehearsing what he thinks will get him a warm meal? And if it is sincere, where did that change of heart come from? Rock bottom can humble you, but it doesn't always heal you. So what shifted in him? Meanwhile, the people back home are living in the wake of his absence. The father, waiting every day, staring at the road, maybe refusing to close the gate, just in case. The older brother, silent, working the fields, likely growing more resentful with each passing day. And here's a layer most miss. How did the community respond? In that culture, when someone disgraced the family, the village had the right to perform a ceremony called kazaza, publicly shaming the returning son and cutting him off from the community forever. So when the son finally turns around and heads home, the tension isn't just about whether the father will forgive him, it's about whether the community will let him live. And now, here's the twist that keeps us on edge. The moment the father sees him from a distance, he runs. Grown men, especially dignified patriarchs, did not run in public. But this father runs.
Why?
To beat the village to him, to shield him from shame, to protect him from judgment. That single act, running to the son, rewrites everything. But not everyone is happy. And this is where the atmosphere shifts again. Because just when we think the story is about restoration, we're hit with another layer of tension. The older brother. The one who never left. The one who stayed loyal. The one who followed the rules and never got a party. His reaction?
Cold, distant, angry.
And suddenly the spotlight shifts. Now we're not just asking, will the father forgive? We're asking, who's really lost here? The younger son who left and returned, or the older one who never left physically, but drifted far in his heart? And with that, the entire parable turns into a question Jesus never answers directly. Because the story doesn't end with resolution. It ends with an open door, a bitter brother, and a father still pleading for reconciliation. And just when you think you've figured it out, Jesus stops. No final decision. No clear ending. Just a mirror. One that leaves you wondering not just what happened next, but where you stand in the story. And that's exactly where we'll pick up next, because what's coming will change how you see grace forever. Just when it seems like the prodigal son's journey is turning around, when the father's embrace signals hope and forgiveness, a strange undercurrent begins to stir beneath the surface. There's something off, something unsaid. The return home is anything but simple, and the more you look, the more you sense that this story isn't done unraveling. The celebration is loud. The robe and the ring are signs of full restoration. But behind the music, behind the clapping hands and the dancing feet, there are whispers, low, cautious, and filled with doubt. Not everyone is rejoicing. Some eyes in the village narrow. A few voices mutter behind cupped hands. Why is the father doing this? How can he ignore what the son did? Some even begin to question whether this was all part of some deeper scheme. After all, the money's gone. The inheritance was wasted. What's to stop the son from leaving again? That night, while the party winds down and lanterns flicker in the warm breeze, the younger son slips out into the quiet. Maybe he needs space. Maybe he can't handle the attention. But something deeper is gnawing at him. He still doesn't feel like he belongs. There's guilt he hasn't spoken out loud, and more than that, there's confusion. Why didn't the father ask any questions? Why didn't he want details about what had happened out there? It almost felt too easy. Like someone was trying to smooth over the cracks instead of dealing with what really broke. And as he stands beneath the stars, staring out at the same fields he once ran from, something shifts.
He wants to know why.
Why was he welcomed back so quickly? Why does the older brother hate him more now than before? And most of all, why does it feel like there's something everyone else knows that he doesn't? The next morning, he tries to ask around, casually at first, but people change the subject. The older brother won't even look at him. One of the servants, an older man who'd worked the land for years, warns him in a hushed tone to let it go, to just be grateful and not stir up old dust. The father's heart has suffered enough, the servant says, eyes darting like someone might be listening. That's when the tension spikes. Because now the son knows. There's a secret here. Something happened during his absence that no one's talking about. Something that might explain the unease, the forced smiles, the way people keep glancing at the father like he's holding something fragile together by sheer will. And suddenly, the son's journey isn't just about redemption anymore. It's about uncovering a truth buried beneath forgiveness. He begins to dig, not literally but emotionally. He starts asking real questions. He wants to know what happened in the months after he left. What did the older brother do? Did he step up out of loyalty or out of ambition? There are rumors, quiet ones, that after the younger son vanished, the older brother began to act like the family's true heir. That he made decisions without the father's full blessing. That he took certain liberties with the land, the workers, even the accounts. It's all speculation, but the younger son can't shake the feeling that his return upset more than just emotions. It disrupted control. And now, someone's hiding something to keep that control intact. Then something strange happens. One of the ledgers from the estate office goes missing. It's a thick, worn book, records of the family's finances, land distributions, agreements made in the son's absence. The father brushes it off, says maybe it was misplaced during the celebration. But the younger son notices how tense he looks. How quickly he changes the topic. And when the son mentions asking the older brother about it, the father's jaw clenches, ever so slightly. That's when the younger son realizes he's not imagining it. There is a cover-up. And it may go deeper than betrayal. It may involve the very foundation of the family's legacy. Late that evening, he confronts one of the younger workers, a new face, someone who arrived while he was gone. This man, nervous but sincere, hints that before the son returned, there were talks of dividing the estate permanently, that the older brother was already stepping into full leadership, treating the property like it was his alone. The father resisted, the worker says, but barely. And when word came that the prodigal was spotted heading home, something shifted fast. Celebrations were thrown together in a hurry. The robe, the ring, the feast, it all happened too quickly, like someone trying to reclaim control of a narrative before the truth caught up. And then the worker says something chilling. "Not everyone wants you here," he whispers. "Some folks think you've ruined everything." Again. That night, the younger son can't sleep. He walks the halls of his childhood home, everything familiar, but somehow distant. And then, tucked away in a dusty storage room, behind a row of cracked ceramic jars, he finds a torn piece of parchment, part of the missing ledger. It's only a fragment, but what's written on it makes his blood run cold. A record of assets shifted quietly from one account to another, dates that don't add up, and a name, his brother's, scrawled in sharp ink at the bottom. He stares at it, breath-catching. This wasn't just about money. It was a calculated move. But before he can take another look, he hears footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. He stuffs the parchment into his cloak and slips out just as the door creaks open behind him. And that's where everything changes. Because now the story isn't just about a son who came home. It's about what really happened while he was gone and what someone might be willing to do to make sure the truth stays buried. As the younger son retreats into the shadows of the hallway, heart pounding, fingers clenched tightly around the fragile parchment, the realization hits him harder than ever. This isn't just about him anymore. Whatever this ledger fragment points to, whatever happened behind closed doors while he was gone, it's bigger than his mistakes. It's not just regret or resentment he's up against, it's strategy. Somebody rewrote the rules in his absence. And now, with that discovery, he knows for certain he's not meant to find out the full truth. The footsteps he heard weren't random. Someone was watching, someone who knew exactly where he'd be. That was no coincidence. Someone wanted him to find just enough to stir doubt, or maybe just enough to set him up. The next morning, while pretending to help in the vineyard, he discreetly tucks the parchment deep inside a leather pouch and waits for a quiet moment to speak to his father. But the older brother is everywhere, giving orders, double-checking the workers' routes, hovering in a way that feels more like surveillance than leadership. That's when something strange happens. A servant girl, barely older than the son himself, approaches him with a nervous glance. Her name is Elia, and she's been working in the house since shortly after he left. With barely a whisper, she presses a folded note into his palm and disappears into the fields before he can even ask a single question. He opens it and reads only 6 words. Asterisk, he knows what you found. Careful. Asterisk, no name. No signature. Just a quiet warning in trembling handwriting. And now the paranoia begins to settle in for real. Because if someone else knows, then how deep does this go? Who's pulling the strings? But what he doesn't know is that this web stretches further than he thought. Across the village, in a small, forgotten corner of the market square, an old man named Malak, once a close friend of the family, receives a curious message of his own. A folded piece of cloth tucked under his door, embroidered with a pattern he hasn't seen in years. It's the same pattern once stitched onto garments worn by the father when he was a younger man, back when Malak and the father worked side by side rebuilding the estate after a storm wiped out the land decades ago. The pattern means something. It's a signal. A symbol tied to a past agreement, one the father swore would never see light again. And now, after all these years, someone is invoking it. Malak examines the cloth, his hands trembling slightly, then looks toward the hills beyond the village. So, he mutters, it's finally happening. Meanwhile, back at the estate, the younger son grows more suspicious with each passing hour. He watches as the older brother conducts himself with the authority of a man who's already taken over. The way he addresses the servants, the subtle corrections he makes when the father speaks, the way he scans the room like he's guarding a secret. It's not just resentment anymore, it's control. And the more the younger son remembers, the more it starts to feel like his return interrupted something far more delicate than just family emotions. This wasn't a house waiting for him. It was a machine already running on its own fuel, and his arrival threw a wrench into the gears. And someone is trying to quietly remove that wrench before everything breaks apart. Then another contradiction surfaces. While walking past the granary one evening, the younger son overhears two workers talking in hushed voices. One of them mentions a shipment that went missing during the months he was gone, livestock that vanished without explanation, supplies unaccounted for, and records that were mysteriously updated to make it seem as if those resources were used for repairs that never happened. That might not mean much to someone on the outside, but to someone raised on this land, those kinds of discrepancies scream of fraud. And now the question burns brighter. Was his inheritance truly the only thing squandered during that season? Or was someone else doing their own kind of spending, quiet, hidden, and far more sinister? The plot thickens further when Elia returns later that night, this time speaking openly, though quietly. She confesses that a few weeks before the younger son returned, she overheard a late-night conversation between the older brother and a traveling scribe who had been brought in secretly. She didn't catch much, but she remembers hearing the phrase "final signature" and something about legitimizing the transfer. The phrase stuck with her because the next morning, the scribe was gone, and no one ever mentioned him again. The younger son listens, stunned, slowly putting the pieces together. If a document was signed to transfer full ownership of the estate to the older brother, then his return might be more threatening than he realized. Not emotionally, legally. Because now he's not just the prodigal son, he's the rightful heir stepping back into a system already rigged to shut him out. But then comes the twist no one expected. Just as the younger son begins planning to confront his father, to show him the torn ledger piece and bring Eliah's account into the light, the father collapses. No warning. No symptoms. One moment he's walking through the vineyard, the next he's on the ground, gasping for air as workers rush to his side. He's rushed back to the house. He lives, but he's weakened, bedridden, and barely able to speak. And now, everything is spinning. With the father's voice silenced, the older brother assumes full authority over the estate, immediately and without hesitation. Meetings are scheduled. Locks are changed. Records are moved to different locations. And the younger son realizes something terrifying. If his father doesn't recover in time to speak the truth, then the truth may die with him. As the sun sets over the estate and the night deepens with silence, the younger son stands alone in the old barn, trying to piece together what he knows. He reaches into his pouch for the parchment fragment, only to find it gone. Just like that. No tear marks. No sign it fell. Someone got to it. Someone close. And as he turns slowly, scanning the shadows around him, he realizes he's not alone in the barn. And that's where we pick up next. Because whoever's in the shadows isn't just watching anymore. They're ready to act. The air in the barn thickened with silence as the younger son slowly backed away from the center aisle, heart thundering beneath his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Shadows loomed larger against the hay-streaked walls, cast by a flickering lantern swaying slightly overhead as if stirred by someone's recent movement. He called out, soft, cautious, more to convince himself he wasn't imagining things than to actually draw a response, but nothing came back. Just the groan of the old wooden beams and the soft rustling of mice in the feed bags. But then there it was again, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. His eyes scanned the rafters, the corners, the stalls, but nothing looked out of place. Still, something wasn't right. And when he finally forced his legs to move and stepped out into the moonlit yard, the tension didn't break. It followed him. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards outside his room, every gust of wind brushing the shutters, sent chills crawling up his spine. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Who took the ledger fragment? How had they found it? And why hadn't they confronted him directly? Why the games, the threats, the shadows? It was as if someone wanted him off balance, uncertain, doubting himself just enough to stop digging. But the more they pushed, the more determined he became. Still, underneath that resolve was something he hadn't felt in a long time: fear. Not the shameful fear that followed him home from the foreign land, but something darker, heavier. This was the fear of being hunted. The next morning, as he made his way toward the stables under the guise of helping with chores, he noticed something strange. Elia was missing. No one had seen her since the previous evening, and when he asked casually about her whereabouts, the other servants stiffened, giving vague responses that didn't match. One claimed she left early to visit family. Another said she wasn't feeling well, but her bed hadn't been slept in, and her few belongings were still where she left them. That's when panic truly set in. Elia had risked everything to tell him what she knew. She had delivered the warning, and now she was gone just like that. No trace, no explanation, and worse yet, no concern from anyone who should have noticed. The house had already moved on, as if she'd never been there. He wanted to confront his brother, to demand answers, but something held him back. The older brother was acting too calm, too measured. There was a new chill in the way he spoke, a forced politeness that felt like a thin veil stretched over something cold and calculating. At one point, he even clasped the younger son's shoulder with a smile and said, "You should rest. The stress of coming home must be getting to you. Sometimes we see things that aren't really there when we're tired." It was casual. Too casual. The kind of thing someone says when they're trying to plant doubt, when they're trying to get inside your head. And it worked, if only for a moment. The younger son's thoughts spiraled. Had Elia really disappeared, or had she simply gotten scared and left? Had someone taken the parchment, or had he dropped it in his panic? Was he truly being followed, or was his imagination feeding off his guilt and paranoia? But deep down, he knew the truth. Something real was happening, something dangerous, and now he was in it too deep to walk away. He had stirred up a nest of secrets, and someone, maybe several people, wanted those secrets buried again. Later that evening, he walked through the vineyards again, hoping the open space might clear his head. The sky was overcast, the breeze sharp and unsettling. He followed the rows of twisted vines until he reached the old well near the edge of the property, a place he remembered from childhood, where he and his brother once played. But tonight, something felt off. The bucket hung too low, rope frayed like it had been used recently. And when he peered inside, he saw nothing but darkness. Still, his gut told him someone had been here, and not for water. It was a hiding place. Or worse, a dumping ground. Just as he turned to leave, he noticed something half-buried near the edge of the well. He knelt and brushed away the dirt to reveal a small piece of cloth. It was torn, stained with something dark, and as he held it up to the fading light, he recognized the stitching. It was from Elia's apron. His breath caught. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't imagination. Someone had made her disappear, and they had left a piece of her behind, like a warning, like a message: stay out of this or you're next. He stumbled back to the house, shaken, every sound around him magnified by the pounding of his pulse. Every glance from a servant now felt like a test, every door left ajar like a trap. He didn't know who to trust. Even the father, weakened and mostly silent, seemed distant in a way he hadn't before, like he was carrying the weight of things he could no longer speak about. The younger son sat outside his father's room long after dark, wrestling with his own guilt, his questions, and now the very real danger circling him. Was the older brother behind it all? Was Elia silenced because she knew too much? Was there someone else entirely, someone in the shadows, orchestrating everything for reasons he hadn't even considered yet? The family's past was no longer a story of rebellion and forgiveness. It had twisted into something else. Something poisoned by power, betrayal, and silence. And for the first time, the prodigal son understood. His return had set off a chain reaction. And if he didn't uncover the full truth soon, someone else might vanish next. Maybe even him. But the most chilling part was this. He was starting to wonder if this had all been set in motion long before he ever left home. And if that's true, then who was the real prodigal? and who had been waiting all along for him to come back, just to finish what they started. The answers were still out there. But now, so were the enemies, hidden in plain sight. The storm rolled in just past midnight, an angry, churning force that seemed to mirror the chaos growing inside the younger son's mind. Thunder cracked like a warning shot across the sky as he sat alone by the window in his childhood room, the air heavy with questions no one would answer and threats no one would admit to. The discovery by the well had rattled him deeply. Eliah's torn apron wasn't just a clue, it was a statement, and whoever left it behind wanted him to feel fear without proof. That kind of control, the calculated, quiet manipulation, wasn't random. It was personal, and it was escalating. Yet despite the tension that wrapped itself tighter around the estate each day, the house remained unnervingly calm, like everyone inside it was in on a secret they had no intention of sharing. Then came the moment that shattered the rhythm entirely. It started with a knock, not on the door, but on the side entrance to the cellar, an old wooden door hardly ever used except during harvest season. The younger son happened to be nearby when he heard it, and something about the rhythm, 3 knocks, pause, then 2, felt deliberate. Cautiously, he opened the door and found no one there. But tucked beneath the loose stone on the step was a small, water-stained book bound in worn leather. It looked old, fragile, forgotten. He brought it inside, lit a lamp, and began flipping through the pages, his fingers trembling with anticipation. What he found inside turned everything upside down. The book was a journal, but not his father's or his brother's. It belonged to his mother. She had died years ago, taken by illness, or so he was told, before he ever left home. Her absence was a wound that the family never discussed, buried beneath unspoken grief and quiet looks passed between father and son. But the entries in this journal told a very different story. In her handwriting, delicate, deliberate, and unmistakable, his mother detailed a growing paranoia in the final months of her life. She wrote of secret meetings held late at night between his father and a group of men she didn't recognize. She described documents hidden in the cellar, financial accounts that made no sense, and whispered arguments between his father and his older brother about changing the inheritance order before it's too late. The most haunting entry came just days before her last dated note. Asterisk, I no longer trust either of them. If something happens to me, it will not be by God's hand. Asterisk. The younger son stared at the journal, waves of disbelief crashing through him. Everything he thought he understood, the tension between father and brother, the unspoken grief, even the father's initial reluctance to celebrate his return, now took on a darker shade. If his mother suspected foul play, if she believed her illness wasn't natural, then what really happened to her? And why did no one ever speak of her again? Was her death part of a larger plan that started long before he left? And more terrifying still, was he next because he reminded them too much of her? The twist unraveled faster than he could process. The disappearance of Elia, the missing ledger fragment, the cold grip of his brother's hand on his shoulder, it all suddenly made a chilling kind of sense. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a squandered inheritance. It was about control, legacy, and silencing the past before it could speak again. But then came one final shock, tucked in the back of the journal, a photograph, yellowed with age. In it stood his mother, younger than he remembered, holding an infant in each arm. 2 sons. And behind her, someone he had never seen before, a man with the same eyes as him, same jawline, the same quiet strength. It wasn't his father. Confused and trembling, he turned the photo over and found 4 names scrawled faintly in pencil. His mother's, his name, his brother's name, and beside the 4th, next to the man he didn't recognize, just one word. Asterisk real. Asterisk. Suddenly, the entire foundation of the story cracked open. Had he been lied to about his lineage? Was his father not truly his father? Was his older brother not his full brother at all? If the man in the photo was his biological father, then what was the motive for bringing him back now? Was it guilt? Was it leverage? Or was it simply time to finish whatever plan had begun the moment his mother dared to ask the wrong questions? Lightning lit the sky as he clutched the photograph in one hand and the journal in the other. The mystery was no longer just about missing pieces or financial deceit. It was about identity, bloodlines, a legacy shaped by betrayal. And now, as he stared into the mirror, he no longer saw the prodigal son returning in shame. He saw a target, a threat, a key to a truth someone buried long ago, and buried deep. But one question haunted him more than all the others. If the man he'd always called father wasn't who he thought, then who had been protecting him all this time? And who had been waiting, watching, for the perfect moment to strike? The answers were no longer just hidden. They were dangerous. And someone out there still had a plan. The storm lingered long after the rain stopped, not in the skies, but in the heart of the younger son as he stood at the edge of the vineyard, the photograph and journal now hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his room. The weight of what he had discovered pressed down harder than anything he had ever carried, even heavier than the shame he once felt returning home empty-handed. Now, he carried the burden of truth, or at least fragments of it, and the terrible realization that knowing more had made everything worse. He hadn't expected peace when he came back, but he never imagined he'd be caught in a battle for identity, for justice, for the memory of a mother whose death might have been anything but natural. And yet, here he was, standing in the middle of a legacy built on lies, with no idea who to trust and too many reasons to keep his mouth shut. But that wasn't an option anymore. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, his mother's journal entries repeated in his mind like a slow chant, her voice rising from the pages with quiet, desperate urgency. The more he thought about it, the more the pieces started falling into place. Why his father had clung so tightly to control, why his brother always seemed cold, calculating, resentful, why Elia had feared for his safety. But even with the clues stacking up, he was still missing one thing: confirmation. Evidence. Someone who could corroborate the secrets he had unearthed. And he realized there was only one person left who might hold that final key: his father. It was nearly dawn when he finally confronted him. The house was still, its silence broken only by the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair on the back porch, where the old man sat most mornings, alone with his thoughts and his regrets. The younger son stepped out slowly, the air sharp with dew and unspoken truth. When his father glanced up at him, there was no surprise in his eyes, only something closer to resignation, like he had been waiting for this day to come. "I found her journal," the son said, his voice low but steady. "And the photograph." The father didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stared at the horizon for a long while, then finally said, "Some things were buried for a reason." "That reason was to protect yourself, wasn't it?" he pressed. "Not her. Not me." The old man sighed, his face folding deeper into the lines time had etched there. "You don't understand what she was getting into. What we were all caught in." "Then help me understand." But instead of answering, the father stood slowly and handed him a small folded envelope, yellowed, brittle, sealed with wax. "Read this," he said. "But know this, once you do, you can't unlearn it. And you will have to choose." "What choice?" the son asked, his voice cracking now. "To protect what's left of this family," the father whispered, "or to destroy it." That was the ultimatum. That was the impossible crossroads where the road ahead split into two harrowing paths. One meant silence, safety, pretending he knew nothing, and allowing the charade to continue. The other meant truth, danger, and possibly tearing apart the only home he had left. He took the envelope but didn't open it right away. He just sat there as the sun rose slowly, casting long, orange streaks across the sky, both beautiful and ominous. This wasn't just about uncovering secrets anymore. It was about whether he had the strength to act on them. But before he could even process what had happened, something else shattered the uneasy stillness of that morning. A servant burst through the door, breathless, eyes wide with fear. His older brother was gone, vanished. No one had seen him leave, but his bed was empty, his belongings still there, and the horse he always used remained in the stable. It didn't make sense. The elder son never did anything without precision. If he left for a reason and he made sure people knew it. But this felt like someone running, or worse, someone being taken. As the younger son rushed to his brother's room to see for himself, he was hit by another wave of dread. The drawer where he'd kept the torn ledger fragment, the one he thought he lost, was now wide open, and inside it was a single playing card, face up. The King of Spades. A symbol that had no immediate meaning, but one that reeked of a message. One that made his blood run cold. The conflict was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, raw, and growing more dangerous by the hour. His father had forced a choice upon him: protect the family or destroy it. But now, with his brother gone, someone else had entered the game. Someone pulling strings from the shadows. Someone who didn't want choices, they wanted chaos. And if the younger son made the wrong move next, he wouldn't just lose the truth. He'd lose everything. The rain returned with a vengeance, hammering the estate like the sky itself was trying to scrub away everything it had witnessed. The younger son moved through the corridors like a shadow, the envelope from his father still unopened, the King of Spades burning a hole in his pocket. Every step he took felt like a countdown, like time itself was closing in on him. His brother's disappearance had set something in motion, something fast, calculated, and far bigger than anything he had imagined. And now, the silence of the house felt less like peace and more like a warning. He had to act, not just to survive, but to uncover the truth that had remained buried under generations of control, secrecy, and manipulation. Driven by instinct more than logic, he went straight to the old cellar. It was the only place left that hadn't been searched thoroughly. Too many years of it being treated like a forgotten relic, filled with harvest tools and rotting wood. But as he pried open a rusted cabinet at the far end, his breath caught. Inside were stacks of files. Old, brittle documents tied together with fraying twine, each labeled with dates that spanned decades. Some were receipts, others blueprints, but many were personal records, land deals, bank transfers, birth certificates with names he didn't recognize. And then he saw it, a map. Not of the estate, but of the surrounding county, marked with red circles over several farms and homes he remembered passing on his journey back. What he didn't expect were the names written beside each red circle, names of families he grew up knowing. People who had long since vanished or moved away under strange circumstances. Families who were once part of the community, but disappeared quietly, their absence chalked up to economic collapse or health issues. But here they were, all connected by paper trails and handwritten notes that pointed back to one man, his father. As the weight of the conspiracy settled over him, the cellar door creaked. He turned quickly, heart in his throat, expecting a servant, or worse. But it was Elia. Alive. Shaken, but alive. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted from the rain, and when she saw the look on his face, she held up her hand. "They're watching everything," she whispered. "It's not just your family. It's bigger. It's always been bigger." She explained it in pieces, each one hitting harder than the last. The estate wasn't just a family home. It was the epicenter of a covert operation stretching back generations. The inheritance wasn't about wealth. It was about control over land, over people, over legacies rewritten by forged documents and orchestrated disappearances. His father had been a part of it. Yes, but he wasn't the mastermind. He was just a gatekeeper. The real force behind the operation was a council of local leaders bound by shared bloodlines and decades of secret dealings. And his older brother? He had been groomed to take over, to ensure the legacy continued without disruption. Until the younger son returned and threw everything into chaos. Elia had found out too much. That's why she vanished. She tried to run, but someone intercepted her. She barely escaped with her life. And now, she wasn't sure who was still loyal to the family and who was loyal to the truth. Then came the final blow. She handed him a torn photo, the missing half of the one he had found in his mother's journal. It showed the mystery man again, this time standing in front of a building marked St. Aurelius Orphanage. Behind him, a small group of children, including one with unmistakable eyes. His eyes. "Elia, what is this?" he asked, voice trembling. "That's your real father," she said. "He ran the orphanage. He died the year you were taken from him. Your mother wasn't supposed to fall in love with him. She wasn't supposed to have you. But she did. And they covered it up to protect their legacy." The shock hit like a physical blow. Everything he thought he knew, every truth he had clung to, was gone. The conspiracy wasn't just about land, money, or betrayal. It was about erasing bloodlines, about hiding illegitimate heirs. And he wasn't the prodigal son who left and returned. He was the buried secret, the threat they tried to eliminate. And now, with the files in his hands and the truth laid bare, he was the final loose thread they would stop at nothing to cut. But the twist wasn't over. Alia's eyes darkened. "There's one more thing," she said. "Someone inside this house is feeding them information. Someone you trust." As the words sank in, the sound of footsteps echoed above them, slow, deliberate, approaching the cellar door. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to break loose inside. And in that instant he knew. He wasn't just fighting for truth. He was fighting for his life. The storm outside had reached its peak, thunder growling across the sky like an angry beast while rain slammed against the estate's windows, matching the frantic rhythm of the younger son's heart. He and Elia crept up from the cellar, soaked in fear and heavy truth, every shadow in the hallway now a threat, every familiar face a potential enemy. The house was no longer home. It was a labyrinth of secrets, betrayal, and danger. And somewhere inside it, the betrayer was watching. Somewhere close. The files tucked under his arm felt radioactive, burning with everything they had uncovered. Evidence of falsified birth records, hidden alliances, illegal land transfers, and the orchestrated silencing of anyone who came too close. But what neither of them expected was how close the enemy truly was. Or how deep the betrayal would cut. They reached the library, a place that had once been quiet and comforting, now drenched in candlelight and unease. The younger son's father sat near the hearth, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, his expression unreadable. At first glance, it felt like another tense conversation was about to unfold, another veiled warning disguised as paternal concern. But then the door behind them slammed shut and the lock clicked. From the shadows stepped the elder brother, his face calm, but his eyes hollow. And in that instant, the final pieces clicked into place. It wasn't the father who had called the shots in recent years. It was the brother, groomed not just to inherit the legacy, but to expand it, to reinforce it, and to eliminate any threat to it. "You should have stayed gone," the elder brother said, his voice low, but pulsing with venom. "This place was mine. Always has been." The younger son didn't answer right away. He looked from his brother to his father, noting how the old man looked defeated, distant, like a puppet whose strings had finally snapped. And then, quietly, he pulled the sealed envelope from his coat and held it up. "You gave me this," he said to his father. "Did you know what was in it? Or did he force your hand?" The father didn't speak, but his trembling hand, still clutching the glass, said enough. The younger son ripped the seal and pulled out the final letter. As his eyes scanned the elegant cursive, the room seemed to freeze. It was a letter from his mother, dated only days before her death, not from illness, but under circumstances now far more sinister. She wrote about her fear, about discovering the council's plans to replace her husband with someone younger, colder, someone more obedient. Her final plea was not for justice, but for her son to know the truth if she could not protect him herself. The last lines were clear. "Trust no one who stands to gain. Not even blood. Especially not him." When he looked up from the letter, his brother smirked. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about love. It's about power. Survival. You were the mistake. The loose end. The reminder of everything they tried to erase." "Then why am I still standing?" the younger son asked, stepping forward. "Why didn't you finish the job when I first came home?" "Because I wanted you to see it," the brother said, stepping closer, now nose to nose. "To see what you could never have. To feel it slip through your fingers." But Elia wasn't idle. While the two brothers faced off, she quietly moved to the fireplace, where the estate's security console had been built into the brick years ago, an old system, barely used anymore, but still wired to transmit recordings. She had turned it on the moment they entered. Every word, every threat, every confession, captured. "You might want to think carefully about what you say next," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The elder brother turned sharply toward her, fury flashing in his eyes. But before he could react, the father stood, slowly, with effort, but with more resolve than the younger son had seen in him in years. "Enough," he said. "It ends here." "No," the older son growled. "You made your choice a long time ago." And then chaos erupted. The elder brother lunged, not toward his sibling, but toward the fireplace, trying to destroy the console. The younger son intercepted him, the two crashing into the shelves, books tumbling like dead weight all around them. They struggled, fists flying, years of resentment and pain erupting in one violent, cathartic clash. At one point, the older brother grabbed the iron poker, swinging wildly. The younger son ducked, grabbing the edge of a table and using his weight to shove his brother back, sending them both to the floor. When it ended, it wasn't with a fatal blow, but with a choice. The younger son stood over his brother, who now lay bruised and bleeding. He could have finished it. He could have become what they feared he would. But instead, he stepped back. Not because he was weak, but because he finally understood that the power they clung to was a prison, not a legacy. Sirens wailed in the distance. Elia had triggered the estate's silent alert before the fight even began. The younger son turned to her, and she nodded. The truth was now in the hands of people who couldn't be silenced. The files, the recording, the letter, it was over. Or so it seemed. As the authorities escorted the brother out in handcuffs and the estate descended into hushed chaos, the younger son stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the damp night air, rain now fading to mist. Elia joined him, handing him one last envelope she'd found in the cellar. This one wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to a name he didn't recognize. He opened it, scanning the contents, and his breath caught again. It wasn't about his family at all. It was about another heir, another child, one born to a different mother, one whose lineage was deliberately hidden, one who had been watching from afar this entire time. He turned to Elia, the weight of a new truth forming on his lips. "We're not done." And just like that, the story cracked open once more. Weeks passed like ripples across a still lake, the storm having come and gone, yet its wake continued to echo in every quiet moment. The estate, once a monument to legacy and silence, now stood as a reminder of the price of truth, its windows no longer lit by deception but by slow, deliberate restoration. The younger son, who had once returned reluctantly, found himself walking its halls not as an intruder, but as someone finally beginning to understand the weight of everything that had been built and destroyed before him. The files were turned over. The authorities had launched a full investigation into the council's years of cover-ups, and his older brother now sat in custody awaiting trial. It was all so public now, so undeniable, that even the whispers in town had changed tone. People weren't afraid to ask questions anymore, and that in itself felt like a kind of freedom. But peace, real peace, didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, through long conversations with Elia, through pages of his mother's old journals he could now finally read without shaking, and through letters from people who had once been silenced but now found the courage to share their truths. What surprised him most was the outpouring of connection, neighbors he hadn't seen in years, strangers who had heard fragments of the story through news and whispers, even distant relatives with hidden griefs of their own. What began as a personal search for answers had become a collective reckoning. People were tired of secrets, tired of legacies built on lies. And in a strange way, his return had given them all permission to stop pretending. The biggest unanswered question, though, lingered in that last envelope. The name on it led him to a small cabin 2 towns over, where an older woman opened the door with cautious eyes and a voice that trembled with recognition. She hadn't expected him, but she knew exactly who he was. Inside, over warm tea and quiet glances, She told him everything, how she had once loved his father, how she had given birth to a daughter in secret to protect the child from the family's grasp, how that child had grown up unaware of the shadows her blood carried. And then she showed him a photo. A woman, early 30s, smiling with a kindness that felt familiar in a way that chilled him. She had passed away 2 years prior in a car accident, but not before giving birth to a son. The younger son's world tilted again. It wasn't just about him anymore. There was someone else now, someone innocent, someone new, someone unknowingly tethered to the web of legacy he had just unraveled. A boy named Caleb, his nephew. He didn't know what to do with that information right away. He returned to the estate with it heavy in his pocket and heavier in his chest. That night, he walked out to the old oak tree where his mother used to sit in the evenings. The stars were bright, brighter than he'd ever seen them. The house behind him, quiet and still, didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a beginning, a new chapter that didn't have to be written in secrecy and power plays. And as he looked up at the night sky, he didn't feel alone. For the first time in a long time, he felt grounded, not in legacy, but in truth. In the days that followed, he contacted the child's guardians, unsure of what to say, how to explain any of it. But the words came, not as accusations or claims, but as an offering. He wasn't there to take anything. He just wanted to make sure the boy knew the truth when the time came. That he had a family, messy and broken as it might be. That he had a right to decide what kind of man he would become, not based on the name he carried, but on the values he chose to live by. The estate would eventually be sold, the proceeds donated to support the same communities the council once tried to control. Elia, now working with investigators and survivors, continued to chase down stories that had gone untold for too long. And the younger son? He moved to a quiet town by the coast. Started over, not as someone running away, but as someone choosing peace. He didn't change his name. He didn't hide. Because what his journey had taught him was that true redemption doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from facing it head-on and choosing to write a better future. And yet, in the final moments of the story, as he stood on that coastal bluff watching the tide roll in, a letter arrived. No return address, only a simple card inside. On it, a single line written in ink too familiar to ignore. The council was never dissolved. It just went quiet. Be ready. He folded the note slowly, staring out at the crashing waves. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun.